First of all, thank you again for allowing me to interview you.
Of course, man. Happy to be here. Reminds me of a young me when I was back in school trying to grind out in sports media. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Now, can you talk a little bit about, we talked for a few seconds about school. What was it like at Colgate University?
Yeah. So I went to Colgate, upstate New York, played lacrosse there. Absolutely loved it. Had a great time up at Colgate and set me up for life after school pretty well.
Nice. Now, you said it set you up for life. In what ways do you think that school helped you become who you are and in the world that you have now?
Yeah. So at school, I was part of a team. And so as a lacrosse player, you go through a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles, especially as a D1 athlete, that a lot of those skills, I think, translate over into the real world. Interacting with your teammates, whether it's a corporate job, whatever that may be, that all carries over very well, which we might get into a little bit later. Is my first kind of itch in sports media was on the local radio station. We did like a Max and Kellerman TV show style, jabbing at each other. It was me versus my New York friend. I'm a Boston fan, and we agreed to disagree on everything. And so that gave my first taste of like an entrepreneurial grind through sports media, and I kind of fell in love with it and continued to scratch my itch after school.
Nice. Now, going off of that a little bit, how did you prepare and set yourself up for being a co-founder of Morning Blitz?
Yeah, so essentially the story with the Blitz is that when I started the podcast at school on the radio station, took it really seriously, spent a lot of time on it, but it was kind of a joke. And but I had a lot of people listening, so my friends, family, things like that. And one of my buddies approached me with the idea. He was already in the real world. He was in the world of finance, and he had been exposed to a few finance newsletters. And so he came to me with the idea. He's like, I don't think there's a sports newsletter big player out there right now. And you seem to be pretty interested in the sports media thing. Why don't you give it a try? And so I just had a say yes mentality, dove into it, figured out what I needed to do to start a newsletter, had no idea how to do that, and got that done. And essentially my senior year of school at Colgate in the spring is when we sent out the first ever Morning Blitz. Basically, the product today is sports under an email, everything you need to know about the world of sports in 5 minutes or less. But it didn't start out that way, right? So we started out with like hot takes, our opinions, like Boston fanhood, like pretty aggressively written in the letter. And we quickly, through customer feedback and things like that while I was still in school, curated the product to be more informational, just concise, quick, skimmable content, everything you need to know about the world of sports, 5 minutes or less. And there wasn't too much opinions. And flash forward almost 4 years now, that's still what the product is today. And we've continued to grow an audience. And so those early days at school kind of shaped the letter. And I worked as a side hustle at ESPN for a while in sports marketing, my first year out of school. And I thought that would be my dream job, right? ESPN, the king of sports and sports entertainment. And I didn't have that love for it after month 3 that I did on day 1. And I went home and continued to grind the Blitz at night and was side hustling. And I had a lot more passion for that. And that's when I knew that I needed to make a change and figure out how I could take the Blitz full time.
Sounds like an amazing opportunity and journey in itself.
Yeah, it totally was. And it was a grind, like an absolute grind. There's no question about it. And it's worth every second though. So like a lot of sacrifices, whether it's social life things, all that stuff, but it was worth it. And so I'm now full-time with the Morning Blitz. We've hired a full-time writer. I used to write it with my co-founder, Noah Cartwright, who went to Colgate with me. And we used to grind it out every day. We recently hired a writer. We wouldn't be where we are today without a team of interns. So we have a great network of about 10 to 15 guys that have helped us along the way. And we haven't missed a day of sending the letter in 4 years. And that's solely due to the interns. I wish I could name them each by name, and which would just take too long, but I really have a lot of respect for them. And yeah, it's been a grind, and nothing can beat hard work. If there's a lesson there, got to stay consistent.
Definitely. It's all about consistency and keeping our hard work at its all-time highest.
Yeah, 100%. Consistency is the key.
Now, going off of that, what advice would you give to someone such as yourself if you were to start what you did many years ago?
Yeah, you gotta, and this is so cliche, so I kind of hate saying it, but it's just true. Like to start your own company and to grind that out, you have to love it. Like if I didn't love sports media, there's no way that we're successful in where we are today with TorchPro and Morning Blitz. Like there's no way. And so if you want to start something on your own and become an entrepreneur and go through that lifestyle and that grind, which I personally love, I think it takes a competitive spirit, competitive attitude, which is something that I learned from sports as well. But you got to be a competitor. You're going to run into a lot of hurdles, a lot every single day. And you got to be able to stay even keel on the roller coaster. So like there's a lot of highs every day with a startup that are amazing. And that's what keeps us coming back. But there's also a lot of lows, and you can't take too much of that for granted. Like you got to stay even keel. So those are just a few like mental things to get you through that initial push. But it all comes down to loving your product and loving what you're doing. And so obviously I grew up a sports nerd and loved everything about sports. And to be able to write about it, create content, whether it's podcasts, work with pro athletes, help tell their stories beyond the field, like that's what I love to do. And so I'm going to put in the work and the grind because I love it.
Now, going off of that, you talked about Torch Pro. What is it like being the head of content, and what is your day-to-day responsibilities?
Yeah. And so to introduce Torch Pro now into the story, Morning Blitz, when I was grinding as a side hustle, when I was at ESPN, Morning Blitz was still a side hustle, not my full-time thing. This is back in the end of 2020. I quit ESPN in late 2020, spent more time on the Blitz there. I had like a month period where I wasn't really had a disposable income and looked for our next step. And that's when I got introduced to the guys from Torch Pro. It was a small team. Their original company was called Company 39, co-founded by NHL superstar Joe Pavelski. And they were set out with the journey to help pro athletes tell their stories beyond the field. And so it was kind of this perfect storm of I didn't want to just be stuck and pigeonholed with the Morning Blitz into the content vertical of a newsletter for the rest of my life. I always wanted to see more than that through content. So whether that's video, podcasts, newsletters, etc., that's what I wanted to do. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to bring our audience that we built with the Morning Blitz and tie it into this new ecosystem with pro athletes. And so now at Torch Pro, you flash forward, Torch Pro has been an entity for 2 years now. And we're building a business that helps pro athletes tell their stories beyond the field through whatever content vertical they want. And we can execute that from root to fruit, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a video series, whether it's a docuseries, social media short form content, or newsletter. Torch Pro can do it all and help the athlete do that. And we're building an audience simultaneously with them. So a lot of people compare us to Barstool, which is the right model to think about it because we have different series content. Like I host a podcast called Pass the Torch. We had an NHL athlete that hosts a mental health podcast called Speak Your Mind. And then we have a lacrosse podcast called Rise Up. And then there's obviously the Morning Blitz. There's Hollywood Sports, which is a different newsletter focused on the drama of sports beyond the field. And then we have different video series that we've done with NHL athletes, NBA athletes, lacrosse, and so on. And so the model's similar to Barstool, but we're different in the fact that Barstool's personalities are their product. And they're pretty open about that. So all their different comedy people, things like that. Our products is our athletes and their stories. And so that's what we're building. And to answer your question, as head of content, my role is to kind of be that liaison between an athlete and the content they create. So what stories they want to tell, I help pull those out and execute that with them and go to our production team and talk about the process from start to finish and kind of be that liaison there as well as being the activation of it. So like, how is this getting pushed to the world? Where is it living on social? What are the copy? What are the messages? All these things is in my kind of role. And also just like strategy of, all right, who are some new athletes we can work with that have cool stories to tell and some new content projects. That's kind of my lane. And so I absolutely love it. And our journey with Torch Pro has been awesome. And the Morning Blitz, I still have a lot of day to day with, but I just don't write it. And it's now become one of our series under Torch Pro. That is our daily sports newsletter and kind of like our Trojan horse to get into touch with more fans.
Nice. It sounds like a well-rounded, not just system, but like organization and how like Torch Pro helps athletes, not just like on the field, but like hearing who they truly like are as a person.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, everyone knows the players' stats and things like that, and they might hear them in post-game interviews or whatnot. But there's more to athletes than that, and that's what we're trying to pull out. And some athletes are better about it now with their social media. Is like having a following on social media is a powerful thing, and as an athlete, you need to be able to take advantage of that. And so, some athletes are good about pushing out content, but there's always more to pull out. And so, we've lifted podcasts off the ground with athletes. That's really give them their own platform. Again, the day in the life videos, feature series, like things like that. It really gives the consumer and the fans like us a better inside look into what makes these guys tick, what makes them so successful, because they're at the apex of what they do, right? Like they are the best at what they do in the world. And that's always super interesting to learn about how they got there. And so, yeah, that's the goal. Find out more about who they are beyond their playing field.
Now, when you're looking at the story of an athlete, for example, what types of key components do you keep in mind when you're creating a story and figuring out if it's going to be a podcast, if it's going to be a video interview, or whatever platform it may be on?
That's a great question. And it took us some time to figure that out. But we want to work with an athlete that understands that building a brand and creating content is a long-term process, and it's not going to happen overnight. So we need to be, back to my earlier point, like consistent about the stories we tell with every athlete and the content we're creating. A new podcast hosted by an NHL athlete is going to be great PR when it launches, but if you're not consistent about doing it and producing good content, it's not going to be successful and it's not going to work. I think the number one most important thing is finding athletes that understand it's a process and are willing to work with us in that and want to build something together. But that's the main thing. And then there's obviously different personalities for everything. So like some people like to talk. That's obviously good for a podcast, and they have great interview skills and things like that. Some might just want the short form social media content that are showing them working hard, whatever it may be. And like, it takes a little bit to figure out what makes sense for everybody. But over time and being consistent about it, it's pretty easy to figure out which lane each athlete should live in.
No, definitely, because one mold doesn't fit all athletes, and the same can be said for any industry, any personnel.
Yeah, 100% right.
Now, with how much success and drive that you have, what type of advice would you give to an aspiring coordinator, media, strategy, and planning personnel?
Yeah, so that was my role at ESPN, and I think a lot of the early stages of your corporate life are just about being engaged with your teammates and like learning. So like, yeah, ESPN wasn't my dream job. I didn't stay there forever, but like I learned a ton. And so just like having that role in whatever industry you are in, whether it's sports or whether it's not, it's just like having that entry level position, you need to be engaged with your teammates and learn, ask questions, like go above and beyond. And that'll go a long way, whether that's the place you want to be the rest of your life or not.
No, that's definitely interesting, because when I started college is not like how because I just recently graduated, how I ended it. And just the journey in itself is like interesting, not just for myself, but like there's so many people that I've talked to where their journey is not like what they are with like doing now.
Yeah, it's going to be a rare case where someone out of college understands what they want to do the rest of their life and gets that job right away. It's going to be a process to figure that out. I'm lucky that I'm 25 and like I understand that I want to grow TorchPro for the rest of my life and build this business in the world of sports media. But I don't think everyone's there, and like it takes a while to figure out. So it's all right to understand that like you have time. You don't need to know what you want to do the rest of your life right away.
Which is interesting because there's a lot of, I want to say controversy around it, but when I talk to older individuals, it's like, yeah, so I worked in this job for 50 years and then I retired. I'm like, but what happened if you had a change of like hard, different goals that you wanted to do, and then everything didn't line up the way that you thought it might?
Yeah, 100%. You got to be able to pivot and things like that. And so I think just being engaged and building a network early on in your career is super important. Like the fact that you're doing this podcast is awesome. Want to congratulate you for that. it's not an easy thing to do, to put yourself out there and to have these conversations. And so one, good for you, but also just building the network, right? Like keeping in touch with people you're interviewing, keeping in touch with other people in different industries, like reaching out to them via LinkedIn and just saying, hey, I'd love to learn more about what you do, and approaching it like that way rather than like, hey, can I have a job, is super important. And like building that network. Networking is 100% a major key to success in anyone's career.
And that's one of those things that I found out. Thank God it wasn't later, during like COVID, when everything kind of was shaken up, from the industries people worked in to like family lives and everything in between. For me, it was like a step back, but it was also a step forward, because I created the podcast and I created my website, for example, that I did for a little bit. And then just figuring out the ways to be a content writer, copy editor, and then everything in between to figure out what I wanted to do and then how to do it.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Now, how do you plan content for yourself in the companies you have worked for in the past?
Yeah, the content planning process can be different for everyone, right? So I'll give you an example for our podcast. So our Rise Up podcast, or Lacrosse podcast, it's more focused on week-to-week stories of lacrosse analysts, interviews, and stories per week. And so the process of that is it's just being prepared for the interviews, being prepared for the shows. As a producer of the shows, like making sure our hosts that get on every Monday night to record know what the show is about, know what they need to be talking about, and providing them some talking points. That's number one, to start having a good podcast, and then continue to cycle in the guests and be that coordinator, schedule that process. Takes time. And then when the recording is done, it's editing the content, which goes to our production team, but then having a like very succinct calendar of when things are launching, why they're launching, right times, right days, right copy, right messages, right tags with people, right, putting content in the right places. And that process of activating content is super important, because you obviously want eyeballs, and there's a strategy of how many eyeballs reach different pieces of content. So with our podcast, after we record, we try to pull out at least 5 social minis, social sound bites, we like to call them, that go on to whether it's TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. And that's a very planned out process. So we have another podcast, the one I host, called Pass the Torch. We've recorded and banked 20 episodes for our season 2. We've released 4 of them, and there's still 16 in the bank, and we're already planned of what sound bites are coming from each one, what days they're coming out, and things like that. So it's very important to plan ahead in the content world. Obviously, some things will sporadically come up that you need to react to and then execute on a pretty quick basis, but planning ahead is very important.
Now, when it comes to the sound bites, because I've recently started listening to Gary Vee, and then I used to listen to him a while back, but then college got in the way, and then people getting in my like ears telling me certain stuff. And then I got back into the swing of like listening to what I want to do and what makes me the person I am and what drives me. So like after just doing all of that, I kind of figured out that one is I like to talk to people, I like to hear the stories, and then based off of that, each platform is different. So for you, when you're creating the sound bites, what types of platforms do you try to maximize your efforts on, or do you go across like all of the channels?
Yeah, we try to go across all of them. We have had a stronger focus on Instagram, just because I think some of the people in our company and myself are more familiar there. So we have 5 clips, say for the week, 1 a day from each podcast. So that'll add up to 3 a day. But because we have 3 right now, and then also other content cycled in to get to Gary Vee's like 4 posts a day, which we also are big Gary Vee fans, and we try to do as much content as we can, because content is king. But yeah, we're very active on Instagram, very active on TikTok. We're newer to TikTok and starting to build a following there. But we're active every day with multiple posts. And YouTube Shorts, I think, is something that is newer to people, but it's the same concept as IG Reels and TikTok, short form content, and it's getting lots of impressions. So those are the 3 main platforms that we post our social sound bites to.
Now going back to Gary Vee and then also a few others such as Kevin O'Leary and Mark Cuban, I saw on LinkedIn that you are following them. What about their story drives you and makes you want to follow them?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying about kind of the athletes being at the peak of what they do in their industry. Like it's the
Mhm.
same with Mark Cuban, like and guys like that. Like they're at the top of what they do, and understanding how they got there is super interesting to me. Because like the lessons you learn in sports again can apply to life. Like Mark Cuban's career has had a lot of the same lessons learned along the way that you see in sports, and so just figuring out how they got there is really cool to me. And like he actually Mark Cuban's interest, he actually reads the Morning Blitz, so it's been cool to kind of interact with him a little bit. Hopefully, get him on our podcast soon. But yeah, the guys at the top of what they do, it's always just interesting learning how they got there.
Definitely. Because it's important to figure out where they started, but like how they got to where they are. And then for individuals such as yourself, figuring out how can I implement this to maximize my efforts and what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and it's again cliche, but almost every time the answer is going to be hard work. Like it starts with hard work, and if people don't want to put the work in, like you're not going to get to where you want to go. And
Mhm.
so it's understanding that, and it doesn't just happen in the early days. Like throughout their whole career, like Mark Cuban is still grinding, and he's still at the top of what he does, and he's still super successful. So that's one of the biggest lessons for me has just been like put in the work, and you'll get to where you want to go.
Now, one last question before we wrap this up is who is your favorite athlete?
My favorite athlete is Tom Brady. He was. I'm a Boston sports fan.
Mhm.
I grew up when my first memories are his first Super Bowl, and so I saw all six in New England when he left to go to the Bucks. I became a Bucks fan. Obviously, still a Pats fan, but became a Bucks fan. Saw his seventh Super Bowl, and again, he's the GOAT. He's the best at what he's done ever, and I think he's been super impressive as a human being too, beyond the field to learn from as well.
So when I was right before I transferred to the school I was at before I graduated, I was able to participate in the SBLI ceremony. So like I was maybe like 5 feet from Gronk and Tom.
There you go. That's
It was
awesome.
like it was
Just
crazy.
shout his name.
Yeah.
I would have been screaming.
Yeah, it was amazing because during the ceremony is I was able to participate in holding one of the banners that they had. What happened was each of us had a certain role we had to do, and then we had to sign a contract, making sure that everything was good to go. Because we also had Mark Wahlberg also on the set, so just figuring out ways to make sure that we were professional, but also making sure that stuff wasn't out to like the media. And of
Yeah,
course, like some students did it, but like most of them didn't because they had eyes on us. But it was a crazy, amazing experience.
that's unreal. I love that.
Thank you again for allowing me to interview.
Of course, man. Again, love what you're doing. Super impressive. Just be consistent at it if it's something you love, and I think you'll be surprised at where it takes you.
Thank you.